All right, let's talk about something that I know can cause a ton of anxiety and even a crisis of confidence for a lot of Christians: salvation. We're going to dig into some of those really tough Bible verses, the ones that can make you ask some deeply unsettling questions. And yeah, this is the big one, isn't it? Can a true believer, someone who has genuinely put their faith in Christ, actually lose their salvation? It's a heavy question that weighs on a lot of people, and honestly, it usually comes from a few specific and, let's be real, pretty confusing passages in the Bible.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to approach this like we're detectives. We're opening up the case files on 3 Bible verses that, on the surface, seem to scream, yes, you can lose it. Our job is to examine the evidence, look at the context, and figure out what's really being said.
Okay, let's dive into our first case file. I'm calling this one Working It Out. This comes from Philippians chapter 2, verse 12, and wow, this is a classic. So the verse says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. You can immediately see the problem, right? That phrase, work out your own salvation, sounds a lot like we have to do something, like we have to earn our spot or work to keep from losing it. It's a major point of confusion for so many people.
But here's the absolute key, and this changes everything: context. Paul was writing to people he called saints, people who were already saved. So he's not telling them how to work for their salvation, he's telling them to work it out. It's all about demonstrating, living out the incredible change that God has already worked in them.
You know, I love this analogy. Think of a jigsaw puzzle. You can't work out the puzzle unless you already have the box with all the pieces, right? It's the same idea. You can only work out your salvation because God has already given it to you as a gift. In fact, the very next verse says, "For it is God who works in you." He does the in part, so we can do the out part. So, case file number 1, I'd say this one's closed. This verse isn't about how we get saved. It's about sanctification, that lifelong process of living out our faith. And that whole fear and trembling thing, it's not about being scared of hell. It's about a deep, holy reverence and awe for God and the incredible task of representing Him in the world. Okay, on to our second case file. Let's call this one the holiness test. Now, this verse from the book of Hebrews, it can sound even more direct, even more conditional than the last one.
The verse tells us to pursue holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Yikes. I mean, if you just read that by itself, it really sounds like an ultimatum, doesn't it? If you aren't holy enough, you don't get to see God. It feels like the entire burden is on our shoulders.
But here we go again. The key is understanding a specific theological idea, and that is sanctification. The easiest way to think about it is this: sanctification is the fruit of being saved. It's not the root. It's the outward evidence of an inward change that has already happened. It's a process, not a password to get into heaven.
And this slide really breaks it down perfectly. We have to see the difference between our position and our practice. Positionally, because of what Christ did, a believer is already seen as perfectly holy by God. Practically, well, that's our daily walk, where we try to live that out. So when this verse talks about seeing the Lord, it's often talking about our intimacy and our fellowship with Him in this life. Sin can definitely mess with our fellowship, but it can't cancel our sonship.
So, the takeaway here is absolutely crucial. A life that shows no desire for holiness whatsoever, well, that's not proof that salvation was lost. It's actually very strong evidence that the root of genuine faith might not have been there in the first place. This verse is a test for what true faith looks like, not a condition for how to keep it. All right, time for our final case file, and this one might be the trickiest of them all. Let's call it false followers. This verse from 2 Peter is about false teachers who sneak their way into the church. So the verse talks about these false teachers who are denying the Lord that bought them. And that's the phrase, right? The Lord that bought them. That's the sticking point. I mean, if the Lord bought them, weren't they saved? And if they're now facing destruction, doesn't that prove they lost their salvation? So to get this, let's think about it in marketplace terms. Christ's death on the cross was the purchase price. It was a payment big enough to cover the sins of the entire world. It's available to everybody. But, and this is key, that payment is only applied to your personal account when you accept it through faith. These false teachers were bought in the sense that a universal price was paid, but they actively rejected having that redemption applied to them. You know, Peter himself uses this incredibly vivid and kind of gross analogy later in the chapter. He compares these people to a dog returning to its own vomit, or a pig that gets washed off only to go roll right back in the mud. The point he's making is profound. Their fundamental nature never changed. They might have been cleaned up on the outside for a bit, but they were never transformed into sheep on the inside. So the evidence all points in one direction. It's really telling that Peter calls them false teachers, not former brothers. They were infiltrators, wolves in sheep's clothing, who were never truly part of the flock to begin with. So, we've examined the evidence in all 3 of our case files. Now it's time for the verdict. Let's connect the dots and see what the big picture looks like. This table really sums up our whole investigation perfectly. In Philippians, the key was sanctification, just working out what God has already worked in. In Hebrews, it was all about evidence. Holiness is the result of salvation, not the price you pay for it. And in 2 Peter, we saw apostasy. These were false teachers who are never truly saved in the first place. And here it is, the common thread running through all 3 verses. If you remember one thing from this, let it be this. These passages are not about the conditions for keeping your salvation. They are about the evidence of genuine saving faith. They describe what a truly transformed life looks like, not what you have to do to keep from losing it. So let's end with this thought. Instead of living in fear, constantly wondering if we've lost this incredible free gift, what if we asked a totally different question? If your salvation is eternally secure, not because of how good you are, but because of Christ's finished work, what does that security free you to become? How does that change the way you live for Him, starting today? That's something to think about. Thanks for joining me.